Hello, and welcome to another edition of our Working Parents Network monthly workshop at the University of Kentucky. Today, we are going to be talking about how to talk to your child about alcohol and drugs. And our guest speaker is Ashley Gann. Thank you, Ashley, for being with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Hey, everybody. I work here at UK in Power, Prevention Outreach and Wellness Education Resources. And I work as official title is Program Coordinator Senior, but basically I'm the prevention specialist for social responsibility and alcohol and other drugs. And thank you all for spending your lunchtime with us today. I really appreciate that. So, okay, help. How do I talk to my child about alcohol and drugs? And I think that's what every parent or somebody who has a child who's important in their lives, I think that's exactly what they think. Help me, right? But before we get started, let's talk about a little bit, y'all can put it in the chat. What are the ages of the children in your all's lives? Because what we say and how we talk to them by age, it could be very, very different. Okay. 21 in January. My son just turned 20. Woo. All right. So it looks like we have a lot of late middle, high school, ages 0 to 30. I love it. Oh, wow. Large range. Okay. Awesome. Well, great. Yeah. And you all are all in different places with the discussions and everything with your children. So this will be fun. We'll have lots to talk about. Well, you are all here. We know that. But why are you here? What's your why? And you all can unmute yourselves and let us know, or you can put it in the chat. Why are you here today? Alcoholism runs in the family? Absolutely. That does have a large impact. Lives are destroyed by substance use disorder. So many different things can happen with a substance use disorder. The effects are many. Oh. So your 14-year-old is really obsessed with alcohol. That'll be an interesting discussion for us to have. Open lines of communication, which is very important. Absolutely. And you know what? Everybody has their own why when it comes to this. But a lot of times they kind of run into a few different categories. The first one is basically physical. Stepmom. Wow. The husband died from an alcohol-related injury, and the youngest has already been drugged to the point. Aaron, what is the age of the youngest? Okay, 14. Okay. All right. So let's be talking about that why for us. All right. Yeah, so y'all went to a lot of this already. Is, one of the big things we hear about is the physical impacts, which of course can lead to that substance use disorder. And, we know that alcohol can lead to all sorts of things, like a greater risk of liver disease, cancer, both oral and colon or rectal cancer, heart disease, depression, stroke, and managing diabetes, high blood pressure, pain, sleep disorders can all be more difficult. And the sleep disorders, I always find the sleep really, really interesting, because a lot of times people will say, well, I have a little drink, a little nightcap, I'll go to sleep faster. And alcohol has a huge impact on sleep. A person can't get to REM sleep as long as there's alcohol in their system. And so REM sleep, we all know, rapid eye movement, your body's also paralyzed during that time, but it is a phase of sleep that's responsible for learning and memory consolidation. When we're talking about not just college students, but all school-age children, that's important. Right? You're here, you go to school for learning and getting all those memories consolidated, right? So that is very important. Also, alcohol impacts sleep, not just for one night. It will impact, person's well-being and, how tired they are, all that kind of good stuff for more than just one day. Also an increase in the likelihood of higher sexual behavior, increased risk of downing, injuries, falls, we know all this, right? And the human brain, we're talking about physical, basically there are 3 times in life where it has more rapid growth or just changes. Of course, the beginning of life, infant to about 2, where their early years or really can have lifelong physical and social and emotional impacts. Positive experience, right? They set up a young person for a stronger lifelong path, while a traumatic experience and environments in those formative years can actually have lifelong detrimental impacts. And a lot of time, like speaking about substance misuse, we talk about ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences, and how that can have an impact. And of course, end of life. For some of us, that's like more concerning at this point than others. When you see that decline, the brain starts to shrink, that affects learning, mental activities, all of that kind of stuff. Now, the third phase is during adolescence. And so one of the most significant changes that happens during adolescence is the development of a more complex and sophisticated thought process. So adolescents have become more capable of abstract thinking. They may begin to think more deeply about their values, beliefs, goals. They might consider multiple perspectives. All of those continue all the way up until the mid-20s. And whenever this was like discovered, it really got around, because now you'll hear people say, oh yeah, the human brain's not, fully developed till 25. And if your young person uses that as an excuse, if there's some behavior that they know that you're not going to be happy with, and they're like, but my brain's not fully developed, don't let them get away with it. Okay. And so the prefrontal cortex won't be fully developed in 25. And that's where the planning, decision-making, consequences, moderating of social behavior, all of those things, that's where that is fully developed. And it's not going to be until about that age of 25. And alcohol leads to a smaller prefrontal cortex, smaller hippocampus, cerebellum, lower white matter integrity. So basically a lot of impacts on the brain with the alcohol use. And of course, the earlier someone starts drinking, the younger, the more of an impact that will have as the brain develops. So physical concerns, social concerns, maybe a loss of friends because of their behavior, social media. I mean, everybody has a camera and they're willing to post anything. So if a young person, maybe they're vomiting, maybe they're passed out, maybe they're doing something else that might be embarrassing, it may be on Instagram within a few seconds, right? So we also have those social concerns, law enforcement involvement. And you know what? If their friends group are changing because of their alcohol or other drug use related behaviors, that may also lead to a total shift in their social norming, which becomes more of a vicious cycle, right? Their friends change, and so maybe now they're around a bunch of friends who are more likely to engage in that same behavior. And because they're surrounded by other people that are engaging in this behavior, it seems more normal for their peers in general, right? And because it seems more normal, what people do, it may lead to more likeliness to engage in the behavior. So you have this very vicious cycle. Also, those Ys fall into academic. Basically, there's a dose response association, negative association between alcohol use and grades. Basically, the higher the alcohol use, the lower the grades. Now, we probably all know somebody who drank in a risky way, but still got good grades. So there are those exceptions. But the research is very, very clear on that. And also people who use alcohol, and of course, those who use more in risky ways, they're more likely to miss class, do poorly on assignments and tests, be late turning things in. They have a harder time concentrating in class. So yeah, you have those impacts on academics and learning. And then financial impacts. Not just the cost of alcohol, not just the cost of a DUI or law enforcement involvement, but also it could lead to a decrease in long-term opportunities. I had a student who wanted to be an attorney. His only plan was he was going to go to law school. He was going to be a lawyer like his dad. That was all it was about. Well, when I talked to him, he had already had 2 incidents of law enforcement involvement. which could really impact his ability to get into law school. So you do have those long-term impacts, maybe loss of a job, taking longer to graduate, so more tuition paid over time. There could be a lot of financial impacts as well. And then lifelong. We know the younger somebody starts drinking, the more likely they are to have a negative outcome. And that includes developing a substance use disorder. And like some of you all already mentioned, you also have the risk of having a family history of having a substance use disorder in there as well. Now, we've talked about all these things, but the really, really good thing, right, is that you have more influence than you think. You know, a lot of times, especially, you know, you get to those middle school years, those high school years, when naturally part of their natural development is really kind of moving away from being as close to parents. Their friends take on an even greater importance in their lives. And you may think there is no way they are not listening to a thing I say, but they are. They might not want you to know that they are, but they are. So parents and other important adults in a child's life, they are the greatest influence, even though we might not think so. Now, knowing that you're the greatest influence, there's also one thing everybody needs to kind of wrap their mind around, is just this thought of not my child. We've heard that before, right? You know, maybe somebody's kid gets in trouble or called up to the school and like, not my child, they wouldn't do that. It can be anybody's kid, right? I mean, I know people in my profession, you know, whose, you know, kids have had to go into inpatient treatment for meth use. It can happen to anybody. But as we know, that whole thought that everybody's doing it also isn't true. You know, we can see even these adolescents, 30-day use rates are still down like about 13–14%. But there is that 13 and 14%, and it could be your child. We just never know. All right. So speaking of parenting and parents being so important, there are basically 4 different types of parenting styles that we talk about. Every once in a while, you might hear somebody pulling a 5th one. These 4 are definitely the ones that are most recognized. So first of all, we're going to talk about that authoritarian parent. This is the parent. Actually, let me back up. So all 4 of these are basically a balance between 2 different things: warmth and love, and then rules and consequences. Each one of these is about a different balance between those 2. And so the authoritarian is very low warmth, but very high on rules. This is a parent that is focused on strict and stern, focused on unquestioning and obedience. This is because I told you so. Now, I actually said that to my son like a week ago. We were talking about something and he was giving me a hard time, so I gave him a hard time back. And I said, because I told you so. But this is like somebody who that's it. Like, you do this because I told you so, you obey. They enforce good behavior through psychological control, more like threats or shaming. There's that little warmth, that communication, that relationship. What might that look like if we're talking about alcohol in this relationship? Anybody want to unmute and jump in? No, Candace, go ahead.
I think that would be like, here's the rule. This is what you're not going to do. There's no discussion about it. Like, this is it.
Yeah, this is the law of our house. You know, without any discussions, like what is it like with other, you know, kids at school? What is the drinking culture like? Is there all that? None of that is there, right? And it's just like, that's the law. So then we have the permissive parents, and they're pretty much the opposite. Very high warmth, low rules. They're afraid to set limits. They believe the child has to they have to be true to their nature without those extra boundaries. This is the parent or the person in somebody's life that are like, they want to be their best friend, right? Having a good relationship is great, But being the parent, the grandparent, the other important adult, the caregiver in this child's life, you are their person. You are the parent, and you are the one that is going to be developing these rules, these consequences, and also providing those in a nice, clear, and concise way for them all the time. Oh, they also gift giving, bribery. What do you all think that might look like where alcohol is concerned? Now, a lot of these things can go ahead, Candace.
I know that there are a lot of parents that will be, use the resources as a way to keep their kids under control, such as, taking their phone away, or, I'm a parenting person. That's what I've done forever. So I'm trying not to get too much into that for you, but taking their phone away and not linking the consequence to the actual action. Maybe taking the car away would be more of a natural reaction, right?
Okay.
But I think as far as like gift giving and that kind of thing, as far as trying to keep them under control, is that what you mean? Like,
well, in this permissive parents that has very low rules, is probably less about keeping them under control, because there
yeah,
aren't a lot of rules.
they're probably keeping them home and saying, well, you can drink, but drink here and don't leave until you're not drunk anymore.
That's what this one always makes me think of. Now, there can be parents in some of those other parenting styles who that is also their take, but that's what this one makes me think of. You're going to drink, so do it at home. And we'll kind of get to that in a little bit more of that. Oh, and interesting, studies have shown that there is a definite link between permissive parenting and that increase in alcohol use, as well as higher rates of school misconduct and lower levels of academic achievement. And both of those that we just talked about, the authoritarian and permissive, they both have a tendency to lead to this kind of tending a look of like their value and self-worth to be from a more external source, from their peers or strangers, and then instead of within themselves. So then we have the uninvolved parent. This is basically the neglectful parent. Very low warmth, very low rules, non-demanding, non-responsive. They may spend little time together, that kind of thing. And this one makes me think, if you're talking about alcohol or other drugs, is, they may not know where their kid is at all. Not to mention, I don't know if they're using, I just don't know where they are. And again, that's just what that makes me think of. And then we have the authoritative parent. And whoever thought it was a good idea to have authoritarian and authoritative in the same like grouping, I don't know, because this can get so confusing. But the authoritative parent, they are high in both warmth and rules, warmth and love, and the rules, right? So they're high in both, and they have this balance between structure and nurturing. They have high but reasonable expectations. They understand the importance of communication and support, balance, discipline, and it's not always easy. Actually, we won't talk about what that might look like. We'll go on. So the whole thing about the parent who's like, yeah, learn to drink at my house because you're going to drink anyway. Well, teens, they really tend to defer to the issue of drinking to their parents, especially those authoritative parents who have that balance, right? And this is really cracks me up. Is so that NIAAA, National Institute for Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse, they have put this out that, adolescents really do listen to their parents on issues like smoking, drinking, that kind of thing. And that they believe that 19% of students believe that their parents should have a say in the music they listen to. 26% say parents should have an influence on the clothing they wear, but 80% think that parents should have a say in whether they drink alcohol or not. So back to that, hey, drink at my house. There are a couple things, two things I usually hear. One is the drink at my house, I'll teach you how to drink. Or, hey, in Europe, they learn to drink at a young age and they don't have the problems we do. Well, yeah, most European countries, the drinking age is 18. And that ranges 16 to 20, it's even lower in Germany. But the World Health Organization, what comes from them is that European teens ages 15 to 19, they tend to report greater levels of binge drinking than American teens do. That continues all the way into adulthood. And so the total alcohol consumption in Europe per person is 2/3 of that in Europe. So that argument just doesn't fly, right? It goes against all of the research out there. And there are a couple of really natural experiments where this is concerned. New Zealand, when they lowered their drinking age from 20 to 18, there was an increase in crashes. Youth started drinking earlier. They started binge drinking more. 12 months following that, they saw a 50% increase in intoxicated 18 and 19-year-olds in their emergency rooms. Now, we also had that natural experiment here in the United States, right? When we went from that 18-year-olds up to 20, we went the other way. And there's a great article by William DeYoung. He's been one of the main people in this field for a long time. That when we changed to a lower age, fewer crashes, lower amount of drinking by adolescents, it also protected drinkers from long-term negative outcomes. So that one just doesn't hold water, that. Now, the whole thing about teaching them to drink at home, the younger somebody starts drinking, the more likely they are to experience negative consequences from alcohol. And that includes having a much greater chance of having an alcohol use disorder or an addiction. So letting them start younger at home, it'll still have that effect. Our parenting styles, well, a couple other things. We were talking about that parenting styles. What does that look like? Say, be a parent and be that parent. Be that parent. Everybody says, I don't want to be that parent. Yeah, be that parent. Communicate with other parents. Make sure that you have an understanding of what everybody's expectations are, and follow up with that. I will never forget when my son had his first real girlfriend and having to call her parents to discuss our roles and expectations. Man, that was awkward. I was nervous, but I did it, right? And it was great because they were like, we're so glad you called. We were thinking about calling you. We had a lot of the same beliefs, like, hey, we don't want the two of them in a bedroom alone. And if for some reason, whatever it might be, the door stays open. And so we made sure that we had expectations and common expectations. The same thing with alcohol, right? Communicate with those other parents. A child is going to go, say they're going to go spend the night somewhere, or they're going to a party. Make that very difficult phone call. Make sure that parent's going to be there. Make sure that they have the same beliefs that you do. I mean, because maybe they're one of those parents that are like, hey, I'll, let my kid drink at home, teach them how to drink. And they maybe carry that over from their own child to your child. So having those conversations, even those difficult conversations, be that parent. Look for opportunities to talk with your child's friends. Now, this will depend on the relationship, right? If you're one of those parents where your house is the house, the kids, the friends, they're always over at your house, look for those opportunities to maybe it may be a sentence or two, right? When something else is going on. But look for that opportunities with their friends as well. Be involved. Be involved in their lives and what they do in school, all those other things, developing that relationship with your child. And I love this one, provide now. One of those things hey, you know what, if you're ever in a place you feel unsafe, something's going on you don't want to be a part of, let me know, text me, nobody will know you're texting me, and, I'll come get you. Now, some people say no questions asked. I wouldn't say that. Because first of all, I could not keep myself from asking questions in the first place. But, certainly would not ask questions right then, depending on the situation. It might just not be the right time for that. But that's just me. Also providing them with an out. So, okay, my son, I had some, I think it was like freshman in high school, right? I had this bottle of rum at the house. I hadn't even used in years. I used it for baking and it was just kind of off with all of my baking stuff. And one day I was like, that looks like it's a little lower than normal. But again, I hadn't used it in years. I didn't know. So I took a little Sharpie and made a line at the top of where that rum was and just kind of left it. Looked at it every couple of days and it was fine. It was fine. Then, oh, that's lower. So we knew he had been drinking. And when he came home, we talked to him about it. We also gave him an alcohol test and a drug test. And we told him, hey, we can do this at any time, right? We had a reason to test him. It wasn't like we did it and he didn't, there was no reason for us to do it. And there may be reasons no matter what is going on with your child. And we gave him notice that this could happen again. And we did do it one more time just to make sure, because you can't say it might happen and it never happened. But this was his out, right? Y'all, I can't do that. My parents might test me tonight. And that is a situation that is going to be dependent on the family, whether they think actually testing is good for their family or not. But my favorite is like, y'all, my mom's crazy. And then a natural parenting expert I'll never forget is he would like show up where his son was and go, oh man, I didn't know if you had any money. And he wouldn't give him like $10 or something. He'd like give him a 50. Right. So now this wasn't a negative thing that the parent showed up. And it got to where like, his friends were like, this was good that the dad was there. It wasn't like giving him a hard time. It's like, yeah, this was good. He had money and the dad did what he needed to do. He showed up. He knew what was going on. So yes, be that parent and then be a parent. This is probably, you're going to hear this over and over and over again. A very clear, concise rules and expectations. Make sure they are consistent. Right? And then consequences. Always have to follow up with consequences where that is concerned. Really, and having those conversations often, right? But make sure those rules and expectations, there is no question in your family what those are. This could be difficult if it's a family or maybe a co-parenting situation where the adults in somebody's life aren't on the same page with what the rules are. And that could be another difficult conversation as to making sure everybody is on the same page as much as possible. Talk early and often. This should be like a normal conversation because you've been talking about these kinds of things forever. And again, those teachable moments. Whenever it comes up, try to jump on it. If you're like me, it's like 30 to 60 seconds later, I'm like, oh, darn, man, I should have said this. And I didn't say it. And now it's going to be really awkward, But really just kind of keep that in the front of your mind. And, I know sometimes that I didn't take it because I was so in my head. Like, should I say this? Should I say that? Just take advantage of those teachable moments and have those discussions. So we all talked about everybody here has young people in all sorts of different age groups. It's important to make sure you're age appropriate when talking to your child. Those younger ones, the little ones, 2 to 4, these are like topics like, hey, making healthy choices, taking care of ourselves, like brushing our teeth and washing our hands. Those kinds of things make sense, right? We want to take care of ourselves. Hazardous substances in the house. We talk about cleaning agents, other chemicals that might be in the house, and putting them away and locking them up where they can't get them. But you can also start talking about prescription drugs. Like, hey, mommy, I take medicine every day, and it was given to me by my doctor, and it's something that is really good for me. It's good for my body, but it's not good for other people. This was just good for me, given to me by my doctor. So having those discussions where you're also getting in that other substance, but it's in a much, much more age appropriate way. And then also teaching those young ones how to solve problems, which will benefit them for a lifetime, right? If you have a child that can't solve problems, you know it. I have one. And that will just, whatever the problem is, it could be something little, just helping them develop that skill. Maybe the ones that get a little older, keep having that discussion, keep it in the present, keep it concrete. This is a bad habit of mine, is I like to bring up examples to try to illustrate what I'm trying to say. And a lot of times that just totally changes the directory because then we're talking about the example. Or the example that makes sense to me doesn't make sense to the other person. Not a good way to get my point across. So yeah, keep it in the present, be very concrete, establish social roles and consequences. You're going to hear that all the time. And then be aware of alcohol use in the home because they're going to model behavior. So maybe think about, hey, you had a really bad day at work and you're coming in, it's like, dang, that was an awful day. I need a drink. That may become a very real and seemingly effective coping strategy for the young person in that household. Like, oh yeah, that's what you do. It's a bad stressed out day. You have a drink, you know, or you know, teaching your 8-year-old to make your bourbon and Coke. Again, it'll be some of that modeling is how you address alcohol in the home. And it's not saying you can't drink. Okay. It's just being aware. Here's where you can start talking about some of the effects of alcohol and then also media influence. Because I'm telling you, I'm just, the media around substance use, there is so much of it. Even, y'all ever been watching the news in the morning and they start joking about drinking? Happens all the time. So something you think, oh, there's not gonna be anything like that. Oh, yeah. And they're just joking about it. And so talking about and being aware of those media influences, using those if they're a teachable moment, or just to have that discussion with them. They get a little bit older. There's where you really kind of start getting into these, again, those rules and consequences. And these, you're probably going to be looking more and more and more towards those rules and consequences and enforcement where the alcohol is involved. But you always want to have those rules and consequences when they're younger. Praise. You know, when they're doing good, let them know it without having their self-worth be about the praise they get. Okay. Be that warm and loving side, right? And praise them when they're doing something well. And again, talk to their friends and their friends' parents. I think this one is just so big. And sometimes you have to take it beyond. Like I remember my son, I asked him, you know, if parents were going to be there. Well, okay, if they're having a party in the basement, but the parents are home, but they never go into the basement. You know, having those discussions with the parents and they say, we're going to be here, like, okay, will you be checking on them every once in a while? What are your thoughts about alcohol? All those conversations with those other parents. When they get older, this is just like an everyday conversation. Open, it's not taboo. It's not something we only talk about when something happens. It's not something we only talk about when I'm driving and you're in the car and you can't escape. So that every time you go out in the car, they're like, oh no, we're going to have the discussion again. This is something just like an everyday normal conversation with your family. And then that listening and encouraging communication. If you have never taken motivational interviewing training, that is great. I mean, it impacts the way I talk to my kids. All of that, like asking open-ended questions instead of yes or no questions. I can't even, see, here I go, trying to give an example, right? Those kind of questions like, well, so-and-so was drinking, why were they drinking? Okay, so-and-so was drinking. What may have like led them to make that decision? Or what was going on? Like in that, when the situation happened? And asking them kind of join in this dialogue instead of, you know, something very short. Okay. And again, just that warm and engaging part, that encouraging communications. And then guess what? They may be legal adults, but you're not done yet. College students, I mean, have that, they're an adult, they're off on their own. I have no more influence. Parents still have a huge influence. Just still having those clear and concise, these are expectations, they still take it with them. And actually here at UK, we have a book that I'll tell y'all about on parenting those older children. But it's interesting working with students who have been referred through an Office of Student Conduct referral. And if we're having discussions, we will talk about what their families thought about their infraction. And some of them are like, my parents, they were heartbroken. They were so upset. Then we have other ones like, no big deal. Actually, another story. I used to be in a UK parents Facebook group. Very frustrating. But at one point there was a question from a parent about like, hey, what are some, like places to tailgate, where there's not a lot of drinking. And so people were talking about some different stuff. And then somebody eventually was like, well, do they want to tailgate? Is this something that's their thing? She's like, oh no, they don't even want to tailgate, but I want them to have the full experience. So her expectation really was that is what college students do. And she was even really kind of hesitant looking for these boys to have like a place where there is no alcohol. But she wanted them to have the full experience. And so for her, the full experience was going and drinking to pregame and tailgates. So anyway, that makes a difference. I'm not a parenting expert. There are a lot of really great resources out there. So if you only take one thing from today, this is it. Where do you go from here? These are such amazing resources. This one, Alcohol at Any Age, a lot of that about how to deal with your kids, how to talk to them by age, a lot of it comes from there. Specifically with middle schoolers, great. Middle school, depending on the child, could be a really interesting time. It could be really difficult for some children, but definitely those discussions with the middle schoolers, very important. We also have some great information from some of our governmental agencies, SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and also NIAAA, National Institute for Alcohol and Alcohol Abuse. And Mayo Clinic, look, I'm always going to like what the Mayo Clinic comes out with. They're, to me, a very credible source. And so I never have to question what I read from the Mayo Clinic. So we also have, here you go, talking with college students about alcohol. This is something that QR code you can access online. I think this is a good resource, even if you have children that aren't college students. Of course, we're talking about age appropriate. You would, use these suggestions within an age appropriate manner. I think that is great. It is a great resource. You can go to it and read through it there. So, all right. Let's just open all that back up because I talked a lot and I talked really fast, a lot of stuff in a short amount of time. Okay. So go ahead and open up your microphones there, unmute and jump in. I think this would be a really good group to kind of bounce some thoughts and different ideas off of.